It is about that time. Let's go ahead and get started. So, hello everyone. Just want to welcome everyone watching to the International Basketball Performance community. Firstly, a massive thank you to all the healthcare workers for risking their lives every single day so we can stay home and be safe. And I hope everyone is staying home and practicing really good hand hygiene. So a little bit about this platform that Thomas and I created. The purpose is to connect with performance professionals throughout the entire world. So on today's webinar, it's definitely a very diverse group of audience from many different continents and countries, which is really awesome. And our mission is to serve as an affordable educational resource for this community throughout the world and help connect performance professionals. So today we're really excited to deliver our first webinar on the theme of how to safely prepare players to resume the season in a 10-day training camp scenario. So we'll have Luca start. He'll give a 15 to 20 minute presentation. Jesse will also give a 15 to 20 minute presentation on how they would approach this situation, this scenario. And we're really fortunate to hear the feedback of Ekram and Jonah from a coach's perspective to help integrate this whole approach. The last 10 minutes of this webinar, we'll do a question and answers section with all of you who are watching. So during the webinar, feel free to leave questions by using the Q&A tab at the very bottom of your screen. So as we go about, as Luca and Jesse present, if you have any questions, just type them in, send them. And then in the last 10 minutes of this webinar, Thomas will feed those questions and we'll get them answered, at least as many as we can in the 10 minutes. So why don't we just do a quick introduction on all of our panelists. So if each of you guys could just go around, just say your name, where you're from, where you currently live, what your current position is, what job, what you're doing, and then one thing you're currently dedicating more time to learn in this specific pandemic. Could be anything from a personal standpoint to a professional standpoint. Ekram, do you wanna start us off?
Of course. First of all, thank you for inviting me. I'm very honored to be part of this. And I hope everybody healthy and safe. This is a crazy situation. No one is expected. And I think this is a chance for all of us to be a star in our role, like they say. So if we have to take care of our part, and we have to, this is what I believe, we have to avoid that negative voice inside of us. We cannot let it come out loud because we know that negative voice affects people 7 to 10 times more than positive voices. So even sometimes it's not easy to be positive these days, but at least we can avoid to be negative and stop talking negative things with other people, so discourage to them. This is my, I don't know, let's say advice to people. I'm sharing this to everybody. And I'm living in Istanbul. I'm from Turkey. I'm living in Istanbul. Currently, I have a performance academy that I'm running. My last coaching after the World Cup in 2018, I resigned and started my academy. So this is my current situation. And I'm trying to improve myself every day, especially on mental side. I'm taking this as a chance to improve. I'm taking a lot of online courses, study, and this is how our days are going. I think it's enough so far. Sam, go ahead, man.
Yeah, you guys can just go ahead. Luca, Jesse, Jonah.
Sure. All right, I'll go. My name's Jesse Green. I'm from Australia originally, South Australia. Now working as the performance analyst for the Sacramento Kings, living in Sacramento up in Northern California, United States. And I guess something that I've been trying to work on during this time is to read a little bit more you know, a little bit more far and wide, just trying to get out of specifically the basketball performance realm and sort of read, you know, outside of performance in general, even sort of read into business, read into economics, and read into just a few other things.
Mike.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Thanks to Thomas and Sam for putting this on and having me on. It's an honor to be with you guys today. And I'm Jonah Herskew. I'm from Amherst, Massachusetts, about 2 hours west of Boston. Like Jesse, I currently work for the Sacramento Kings as well. I'm on the coaching staff and focus on the advanced scouting. So it's my job to be an expert on our upcoming opponents and their plays and schemes and hand signals and all of that. During this free time, I've tried to spend more time with my family, which is hard to do during the season. And I've also created a new company called Continuous Coaching Collaborative, and it's a platform for coaches to improve their craft. And we've been doing weekly Zoom calls every Friday night on different topics having to do with coaching. Sam and Jesse have joined a couple times. So it's just been a fun project to work on and develop during these unprecedented times.
Excellent. Okay, so Luca, I'm currently working as a head of physical performance in Baskonia in Spain. I'm originally from Croatia. And during these days, I'm of course still in charge of the team. You will see later on and hear about how we are working. But in the free time, in the afternoons, evenings, I'm trying, of course, to read, to listen to different podcasts. Some of them related to the field, some of them not so much related to the field. And of course, I'm also taking advantage of being at home with my fiance, having fun and improving my cooking skills.
Nice. Go for it, Thomas.
My name is Thomas, and first of all, I'm really thankful for all of you guys to spend some time with us. It's definitely an honor, and it's something that we really appreciate. You know, that you want to engage with us for free and actually take time out of your busy schedule during these rare times. I'm originally from Belgium. I grew up there as a basketball player, and evolved into a coach. And I spent 6 years in the States, and now I'm back in my second year in Belgium, working for the team that I looked up to as a kid. So it's definitely an incredible experience. And something I'm working on right now is mostly around research for my PhD. During the season, as you guys may know, sometimes really hard to dedicate a lot of extra time to certain outside projects. So very excited about it. And then outside the field, just as Jesse said, I'm also always trying to look outside my own discipline, especially in high-stake environments or high-stress environments like the airline industry or the military or astronomy. So I think there's a lot of relationships there with the sports, elite sports environment. So yeah, just trying to make the best out of this time to evolve. So. And then lastly, also, just like Luca mentioned, the cooking is definitely something that is improving. Still working on it, but yeah, so.
Great. I'm Sam Repson, and I'm originally from Amherst, Massachusetts. So Jonah and we actually grew up together. And I just finished up my a 1-year position as a performance coach with the Sacramento Kings. And right now, I am focusing a little more and reading a little more on emotional intelligence, a little more of the softer skills. Also working on my banjo skills a little bit, and then cooking as well. And I will say, if you want a good pizza dough recipe, this has been a game changer for me. Flour and Greek yogurt. I'm telling you, give it a shot. It's great. So I will say, everyone who's on the panel today, I've had a lot of time to spend some time with them from a personal standpoint and professional standpoint. And they're really, really high character, high quality people. So we like to associate ourselves, Thomas and I, with these types of people, and just say, first, they're good people. Second, they're incredible at their profession. So really excited to hear what they have to say today. Yeah, without further further ado, why don't we get started? Luca, do you want to get us going?
Yeah, perfect. No problem. Just give me a second to share my screen with everyone. So you will tell me if it's working, and then we can start.
So I think it'll probably be best if the panelists, why don't we just mute ourselves, let Luca go through the presentation, and then, yeah, we'll pick his brain and we'll start a little discussion once he gets through his presentation.
Excellent. Just Sam, stay with me for a second, just to tell me if the presentation is moving.
It is.
Is it? It is.
Yeah, looks
Okay.
good. Yep.
One more
Okay.
thing, guys, that I just want to mention for our entire audience. Throughout the webinar, you can ask your questions in the Q&A, and we will handle those at the end. So feel free to drop your questions if you have them through the Q&A section. So.
Excellent. Just give me one second. Okay. I think it's gonna work. Perfect. Just to start my time. Okay. Excellent. So we have like 15-20 minutes to talk about the quite interesting and complex topic. So I will definitely leave you with some nuggets in the end and some practical ideas for return to train process. And of course, if you will have more questions, feel free to text me at any point, and I will really like to reply to all of your questions. So I think in this whole process of coming back to train and returning to the court, first step is to answer some important questions. And I think the first, maybe the most important question now that we need to ask ourselves is what players did during the quarantine. I think this is the key point, because basically the whole training process and return to train period will be based on how was the quarantine. I spoke yesterday to 12 strength and conditioning coaches of Spanish teams, because now Spanish Federation decided that probably we will continue the competition in some modified playoffs, where we're going to have 12 teams competing in 2 different groups, and then 2 best teams in each group will compete and finish the season by playing Final Four. So what we spoke yesterday during this 3-hour meeting was mainly focused on how we're going to train once we get back. And what I could see was the huge diversity between the teams, and very, very big difference between what players are doing now in different teams. For example, a couple of teams out of those 12 teams have players in their cities where they train normally. So they are organizing Zoom sessions, you know, and taking good care of the guys. Some of the teams let foreigners go home, so they are working more individually. Then I don't know, for you who are listening from United States, I don't know how familiar you are with the Spanish National League, but we have 17 teams of Spain, and then we have another team from Andorra, which is a micro country in between Spain and France, who is competing during the last several years in Spanish national competition. But for them, for example, it's completely different rules inside the country now. So they can, at specific hours throughout the day, they can actually use their training facilities. And for them, it's completely different physical preparation at this moment, because they can run and do many different things. For us, only a couple of players who have some gardens or a backyard, they can maybe run a little bit, but most of our guys live in the apartments, so we are all limited to our living rooms. So I think this is the key point that needs to be answered in order to start preparing your own program. And another question that we have to consider before starting is actually head coach and his vision in the whole return to train process, because we can have one idea, but if we don't respect or ask the head coach about his vision, we are in like doing something completely wrong. So some of the things need to be discussed with him. Another thing that we need to consider is also some special concerns, because we might say, okay, we'll return to train, everything is going to be like it was, but then we have to realize that it's not always like that. Especially in this case, probably there will be high safety measures or rules by the government or on how to organize trainings. Now in Spain, they say that we will be able to train, but in a small groups, 2 or 3 players at once, with only 1 or 2 coaches, and so on. It's not clear yet, but it's something that is probably going to influence very, very much how we're gonna really design our programs. So it doesn't matter if we have the best program for team activities, if we're gonna have it as a rule from the government, probably we will have to respect it completely and then organize it different maybe from what we intended. And then the last thing that we also need to question ourselves and answer is how many days we actually have until the first official game. For this presentation, we said like we're gonna talk about 10 days, but it can be 20 days, 30 days. It really depends on the federations. And I think it's good that we selected 10 days for this opportunity, because it's gonna be clear with the principles that later I'm gonna present. So another step that I said like probably is the first one, evaluation of the quarantine work. I think we have to see what was good, and I can give you an example what was good in our case. In the first week after the quarantine, we try to give our players as much equipment as we can: bikes, heavy, light kettlebells, dumbbells, foam rollers, basketballs, medicine balls, floor mats, and so on. So I think what so far was working pretty well is a basic strength program, power development or just maintenance, some basic endurance stuff on the bike, some strength endurance by doing high intensity work with some dumbbells, doing tabatas and stuff like that. I think it was okay what we did regarding no contact jumps and change of direction. And also we attacked individual issues, problems, acute and chronic problems that players had, such as plantar fasciitis or knee tendinopathy. Especially in the first 3-4 weeks, I had a really hard focus on that, because I gave players some time to rest also. But of course, we took advantage of that and we attacked those individual issues. However, we have to be clear on what was missing during this period and what we are still missing. Basic strength, or better to say sub-max or max strength, is something that we are missing because we don't have barbells or like really, really heavy equipment. And we are missing specific endurance that can be obviously developed only on the court. We are missing specific agility because, okay, we can do a lot of no contact jumps, changes of direction and stuff like that, but specific agility on the court with contact of the opponent, it's something completely different. And then final thing that it's quite different, and it's going to be quite different once we get back, is the weekly rhythm. Of course, we can organize 2 training sessions a day, alternate hard and easy days during this cycle, but we cannot reach that weekly rhythm and residual fatigue in our players that is caused by playing a game or having a training session, team training session. So for example, we know from practice that we can have 2 players who play 20 minutes one game on Wednesday, and then residual fatigue can hit in for one player the next day, and for another player it can be 3 days after. So it's completely different rhythm. And once we are in the process of the in-season, maybe it's easier for our players to understand our players and how they react. And now it's going to be complete mess for sure once we get back. Another step is setting these major principles that we have to follow with our head coach. And I think the first principle is to decide how many days we're going to spend in no contact trainings. I'm going to give you reasons why later on. Then we have to also consider to separate strength and conditioning sessions from the real team practice. Another principle is to keep team practices short but intense. And the last one, I think, to organize everything in a way that we are looking for an effective way to run, where each drill has a unique and specific goal. So why no contact in the first days? It's pretty simple. For me, first, respect players and their sensation with the ball, with the court. You know, it's something that they are missing a lot, so we have to give them some space to feel the environment again. Another factor is really going back to real mechanical stress. It's not the same to do change of direction in your living room and doing it on the court with the ball. And of course, what's it gonna bring to us, it's definitely decreased injury risk, because it cannot be compared to the situation where we start first practice right away with the contact. Then, as I said, strength and specific conditioning is something that I think we should do in the mornings, and it should be like a micro stimuli, 30 to 45 minutes work that will not cause severe soreness. So in the afternoon, not every day double session, but in the afternoon when we have a team training session, can players come pretty fresh and ready to make a good training session. When it comes to effective running, usually in my philosophy, I try to make things pretty simple. So I always talk in three different types of conditioning for basketball. It's basic, specific, and competitive conditioning. In this case, I would leave out completely basic conditioning that does not consider court. I would focus on the court, and I would do either long intervals where we would run and shoot, maybe. So we would run up and down, use the whole court. And then for the shorter intervals, maybe we would use 1-on-0 mixed type of movements with shuffles, dribbles, penetrations, and so on. Or we would even take advantage of running through 5-on-0 tactical sets, because in Europe, it's pretty popular to go and run up and down, just running through our plays. And this is another way. If we put specific time to work and specific time to rest, I think it's a brilliant way also to get some specific conditioning. And then, of course, in the team training session, competitive conditioning, everything what starts from 1-on-0 to 5-on-5. And of course, consider maybe the most important factor that we have to consider now is the control of drills made on half court and drills made on full court, and number of transitions that we are trying to do up to the scrimmage game of, I don't know, 5, 6, 10, 12 minutes. About team practices and competitive conditioning only, I think one of the most important things is to decide how great the volume of those training sessions will be. And as I said, we keep strength and conditioning in the morning micro stimuli, and then with team training sessions, depending on the day, we're going to go either for a shorter session, 45 minutes, and then maybe moderate volume session would be around 1 hour. Intensity always high, because with high intensity, we're going to reach something what we are looking for, a high intensity competitive environment. And something that is related to this training volume is also decide work density or work rest ratio. Of course, in the training sessions where we're going to go a little bit harder, so stress players with a moderate stimuli, maybe we're going to make practice a little bit more dense with less rest periods. And then on the contrary, when we're going to do a micro session, 45 minutes or easier day, we're going to give players more time to rest. Why short trainings? There are several different reasons. First of all, because for us as strength coaches and also for head coaches, something that lasts a little bit less, it's always easier to monitor and to manage. So I believe that if we keep players practices pretty short, we can make certain adjustments, but always thinking about greater volume, it might not give us the greatest benefits. Then the second reason is something that I mentioned earlier, and I gave an example of game, but now in this case, trainings. If we stress players with really great volume, we might have a a very hard boomerang effect where players will have different responses to this high load, and then we will have players with high residual fatigue on the next day, in 3 days, even in 5 days. And then we will, this situation is going to be really, really hard to control. And I think greater volume also demands more time for recovery, which is pretty hard to give in this period where we're gonna train a lot, because we are not actually preparing for the start of the season. We are preparing ourselves for the playoffs, and just for 5 to 10 games, which will decide the champion of the current season. So I think that is one of the reasons why also avoid greater volumes, because recovery will be affected, and also sleep quality and general physical condition and state of players. So we have to prepare our schedule, and our schedule will probably look something like this. And before I explain every piece of this general schedule, I just have to give you a little bit of insight into what we did as Baskonia during this quarantine. So we are now right here. We just finished week 6, and now we still have 2 weeks left until hopefully we're gonna get out and start practicing in some way. In the first 4 weeks, we did individual work, completely individual approach, and then now from the week 5, we started with team training sessions. We are organizing it through Zoom. So in the week 5, we did 4 training sessions. In week 6, we did 6 training sessions. And then in the week 7 and 8, I plan to do 9 training sessions. We are working from Monday till Saturday. Sunday is off. So next week, we're gonna have Monday, Wednesday, and Friday double training session. And it's gonna be probably the same in the last week. Okay, and then Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, only 1 training session. So the goal is to do whatever we can, and my primary goal with this increase in number of training sessions is actually approaching the week 9 with the volume of work that could be similar, or at least at 80-90% of what we will be facing, because that's one of the ways how we can protect players against injuries and keep them ready for the demands of that week 9. Of course, we are not forgetting the intensity and the importance of the intensity. And then secondary goal, of course, is the movement intensity and the mechanical stresses. So yes, we are doing jumps and changes of direction, as I said, but since we are really limited to our living rooms and really, really small spaces, I cannot say that I am pretty happy on how much intensity we have behind this all high intensity interval work, Tabatas, and similar type of work. However, we are around, I don't know, 40, 50, maybe 60% with some players regarding their intensity. But still, so we are still far away, especially because players cannot run. Now, to go back to that schedule, we have 10 days. Day 6, day off, so we have 2 microcycles of 5 and 4 days. In the first days, we're gonna alternate 2-1-2-1-2 practices, okay, and then no contact couple of days, and after that contact. Then we're gonna start with moderate load, see how it goes, and then maybe finish the first microcycle with high load, then open the second microcycle with high load and finish with some kind of short-term tupper. Then we start with full court exercises just to see how players will react to running full court. Of course, controlled, not so many transitions, and then alternate full court, half court, full court, half court, and so on. And then what I think it's very important is to find days where we're gonna play some scrimmage, maybe not 4 times 10 or 12 minutes, but maybe 4 times 6 and 4 times 8 minutes. Okay. Now, when it comes to monitoring of load and readiness, I think crucial thing in this period will be our experience, not only our experience, but experience of the whole coaching staff. Then conversations with players and even some subjective questionnaires, especially related to their physical readiness and well-being, quality of sleep, muscle soreness, and so on. And of course, we're going to use some objective data. We are using Catapult, so there will be some objective data behind everything. What my approach is now during this period will be very similar to what we have during the first weeks of the preseason camp, where we still have some players who we don't know, and because they have just signed with the team, or we don't have objective data or their chronic load during the previous weeks before the training camp. About load or work management, I think we have to keep individual injury history in mind, players with chronic injuries and issues. So just to give you an example, we know that half-court drills will lead to greater mechanical stress. So we have to pay attention on those days where we stress more half-court exercises and drills, players who had problems with knee tendinopathy or Achilles soreness and stuff like that. Then on the full court drills, we know that it leads to greater metabolic load and muscle fatigue. So we're going to have problems with calves, hamstrings, and quadriceps. So that's something that should be kept in our mind. I think in this period, all head coaches need to consider having their development players, young players, to be like in the rotation during practices, so they can help players, especially veterans, in their rotation. And of course, key players who will probably compete later on, they should be maybe in the last part of the practice practicing a little bit less, or even to be rested. And then finally, last slide, just to say that for me, the same amount of time that I'm spending on thinking about this return to train process, I'm spending same amount of time to think about the period when we're gonna go back to compete. And then for me, I think one of the very, very important parts of a return to compete process is to keep our team practices short and tape only when it's really, really needed. Then in the games, we have to look for more frequent subs. And I know that some of the players don't like it, but I think head coaches should step up here and have a better conversation and connection with players and do some checkups, ask players during, I don't know, when foul is withdrawn, maybe to ask, hey, how you feel, do you need sub, and so on, and use timeouts also in a smart way. Of course, for us in Europe who are not using very often charter flights, I think we have to travel smart, not to take early morning flights or travel after the game. I think we have to consider sleep as a really, really important factor of recovery in this period. It's always very important, but in this case, it's going to be super important. And I think recovery, give to players everything what we can, especially players who play more than 20 minutes, even if it considers organizing a cold pool in the hotel room, asking for ice or stretching on the corridors, whatever we can. Okay, that was all from me. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, Luka. Nice job, man.
Thanks.
I'm going to start off with a quick question. I really liked what you said about trying to organize with the coaching staff the specific drills so you can have a pretty clear work to rest ratio, so we can get a pretty specific adaptation. I mean, do you have any like suggestions on how to communicate that to the coaching staff, or ways that you've organized that in the past?
Well, it depends. It depends on the drill, of course. But we know more or less what is the usual work rest ratio in basketball. They say like between low and very high intensity activities, 1-to-4 ratio, and just a couple of seconds of activity followed by greater amount of rest, or like low intensity activities. So of course we can start with much more rest. So for example, 1-to-5 ratio, and of course we have to decrease the amount of rest. And with any type of high intensity interval work, we just play with the rest time. And I think we should keep the work, for example, work activity pretty short, 10 to 30 seconds, not more than that, but then play with the rest. So maybe we'll start with 1-to-5 ratio and then go down to 1-to-3 ratio, even to like highly stressed players. We can go down to 1-to-2 ratio or 1-to-1. So, but it depends on the drill, you know, it depends on the drill that we are using. If we are doing no contact, if we are doing full court, it's really drill specific.
Have you ever bucketed the groups into, okay, this group needs more aerobic capacity, this group needs more speed strength, and in the scenario that maybe you're only working with, the coaches are only working with the players in small groups, like 2, 3, 4, 5 players at a time, do you think it's possible to say, okay, well, let's try and organize this group as this is a group that needs more aerobic capacity, so we're going to try and focus on like a 1-to-1 work to rest ratio on the drills. And if this is a group that needs more speed strength, maybe it looks like explosive movements, longer rest periods. And that's kind of a question for anyone on this panel. Like, could that work? Have you guys had experience with that?
For me, it's a brilliant question, and it's something that I really like to do when it comes to preseason, because we have much more time, and I think we also have data which will support it pretty good. So one of the questions and debates that I had with my colleagues lately is, are we going to run some tests? And what would it be that it gives us some kind of guidelines on in which direction we want to work? And this is for me something that it's really tough to answer. Why? Because if we run the test, for example, 30-15 intermittent fitness test or a yo-yo test, and we really see that there are some players, like we can split them in 2 different groups, and we can see that some of them really lack basic aerobic capacity, and we now know how to work. Okay, of course, but we are talking about 10-day period, or like let's say even 20 days. Even if it's 20 days, it's too less from my point of view, and I think from head coach point of view, and that's why we have Ekrem to answer this. But I think we have to see how to be effective. And what I said to one of my colleague when we had this discussion, and I said, okay, so we will have the test, and test will show that player A ran stage 17, and we have another player who ran stage 19. Doesn't matter how good or bad he is, we're gonna do some high intensity interval work. Of course, it might happen that player with less capacity will suffer a little bit more because he will not recover as fast as another guy. But what we are looking for and what we're gonna have for sure is the improvement. So probably in the 10, 15, 20 days, just by practicing basketball, which was supported with so many scientific papers, just by playing basketball, you will improve. And what we are looking for is to improve. And probably this guy 17, in 2 weeks, if you retest him, will be at 18.5. And maybe this player B will just move from 19 to 19.5. I don't need to test him because I know that my program will somehow help him. And my goal now is not to test and retest and say, yeah, we made an improvement. No, we need to somehow use every single step of that player in an efficient way. And I know that we will make a step forward. How much, I don't know, but it's not all about strength and conditioning. It's about preparing players and asking them of their feedback and knowing if they really feel the difference. So that's my point of view.
Yeah, awesome.
I'm not saying it's not that it's not valuable to run the test, but I think it can be a little bit of waste of time without real end goal in mind, especially if you're not going to retest. And for sure, you're not going to retest because usually in the preseason of elite teams, 2 days before the first official game in the preseason, we are not retesting. And now you will not do it for sure because we are not starting or restarting. We are not starting the competition for the first time. We are actually starting to play players. So you cannot run a test 1 or 2 days before just to see if someone improved from 17 to 18.5 on the test.
Sure, that's
it's
a really
complete
good
madness.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I agree with you totally, Luca. Like, especially in this instance, in this scenario where we're talking about 10 days, and given how much load and how much work we're trying to fit in within that congested 10-day schedule, even if you were to retest, you can't be sure that there's not residual fatigue that could certainly cloud any improvements that were to occur anyway. Especially if you don't do a taper and you're not allowing for any super compensation or any of those benefits to come into effect. So, if you do test and then you retest, you might have wasted, twice the amount of time by doing both tests. Whereas, as you said, keep the main thing and use all of that training time for basketball, especially in this congested 10-day period.
For the coaches, I'm interested, like Jonah and Ekram, when the performance staff has said, coaches, like we want to do a conditioning test, and you agree, like, great, we'll do it. And then now you have this information, this data in front of you saying these 4 players are underprepared, they're below the minimum standard, rest of the team is in a good spot. Like, is that information helpful for you? Do you find it valuable, or is it very noisy? I'm interested to hear what you guys think.
For me, sorry.
Go.
For me, I think it's, of course, it's valuable information, but it's also noisy. It's we have just 10 days. I agree with Luka 100%. Like, very short time. We are not starting the season from the beginning. It's gonna come. Most teams are going to play playoffs, and also, of course, we need to improve their conditioning, well-being, this and that, everything. But we have to improve teamwork also as a basketball-wise. So most of the time, we have to mix together, work together. And when we go hard, when we go slow, maybe more teaching. I don't know, it's a special time, but I 100% agree. Testing right now is a waste of time. This is my point of view, because you have no, test is, of course, is great. We have to have. But 10 days, what we gonna do? Just make them at least as much as they can contribute to the team, prepare without injury. And also, most teams, what I see, they are doing a lot of physical work at home, alone, like living room. But I'm not sure if many teams are doing mental work. And this is, I think, equally important. No other one is more important than the other one. So I'm sure, like we all miss basketball. Players do too. So we have to educate them when they come to court first day. We can't let them go like horses, because they will go all over. They will run. They just, everybody in stress. So in these days, what I think, and when I talk to my colleagues in Turkey with friends, which coach in the teams, mostly I'm trying to remind them, we have to prepare also mental side. We have to keep them calm, good goal settings, focus without losing motivation. Some might be more fired up, some might be less. Also, this needs to be considered. So, I don't want to disturb you guys. You're doing excellent thing, like more technical stuff. But I, as a coach, head coach, I did prepare teams like in 12 days pre-Olympic tournament. I had this experience, but this was after the season finish. They played the last game, 6 days rest. Then we meet. In 12 days, we went to Olympic qualification. This is a different scenario.
Sure.
Now they've been at home, they're working alone. How they're working, some clubs are lucky to control them, some are not as much. So I think tests, of course, no one can say no, but it's this time, Sam, I think it's might be, in my point of view, waste of time. We just need to come together, make the plan. Hard, soft, soft times, more teaching, because teaching also is going to be there. It must be there. they are not we are not, when we meet, we are not going to play the same game that we were playing before the break. So maybe we should reshape the team. Some might be more aggressive, or some of the players might be more aggressive, some less. I mean, it's very, very critical situation. We have to be very clever and work as a unit with the strength and conditioning coaches together.
Sure.
I think that's all from me.
Just to piggyback on that, to add to that, I think my approach is, I look at it as this is part of the pie, right? So there's a full pie. You have analytics and numbers that Jesse with us helps us with. You have the strength coaches giving their opinion. You have your player development coaches. So it's all part, not, like Ekram said, not one part's more important. They're all giving you information. So in an ideal world, I would love that information. Now, what I do with that, it's up to the head coach, right? I also think to kind of add on to what Luca was saying, you're going to have different types of players. So, and I don't know if Jesse, you might touch on this, but your last guy on the bench, like those guys that are maybe not going to play in games as much, I think you can utilize your pre and post practice time or even your off days to not to give them too much of a load, but you need to have them ready to play in games. If someone fouls out, someone gets injured, all of those scenarios that we can't plan for. So whether that's 2-on-2 or 3-on-3 or more conditioning, I think that's important. And then my last point I want to make it is just to echo what Ekram said, and Sam and I have talked about this a lot. It's called the Stockdale paradox, and Jim Collins wrote about this in his book, Good to Great, and he can explain it way better than I can. But James Stockdale was a prisoner of war for 7 years during the Vietnam War, and he was tortured during this time. It was brutal, and he was the only one to make it out alive. And what General Stockdale did is he balanced his optimism, his hope for freedom and a better world with his realism and reality. So what I take from that is like those that can accept the reality and then move forward with a positive outlook will prevail. So I totally agree with Ekram. Like some coaches, it might just be back to business, right? And we're just running this play and we're just practicing like it's January. But this crazy thing happened. No one could have predicted this 3 months ago, right? We're all just head down going through the season. So, and this is something that Luke Wallen with the Kings, I think, is one of his biggest strengths. He never forgets that he's coaching people, right? You're not coaching robots. You're not coaching people that don't have thoughts and emotions and fears and all of these different things. So I think as a coach, maybe the most important thing to do that Ekram was saying now is to talk about these issues. And there's things that are bigger than basketball. So how it affected you. A lot of people might have parents or relatives that have been affected or maybe even passed away from this. So how it affected them, what we can do with our platform, whether it's charity or donating time and money, maybe honoring doctors, or, it can go so many different ways. And that doesn't have to be a lecture every day for an hour. It could be a 5-minute conversation in the middle of the court. So I think those are my thoughts. I know I rambled for a little bit, sorry. But Ekram, I agree with you.
One thing I would like to add to that, first of all, Luca, that was a great presentation. I think you did a fantastic job on undulating periodization. I think one of the main issues that we commonly see in a lot of clubs, at least from my experience, is that monotony, having the same loads week by week, is a common issue. And I think we as a support staff of the head coach have an important responsibility in bringing that information and trying to let him understand that we're trying to not have constant loads over time. So I think that's awesome. And what you've really touched on is on all the controllables. And I think that's what we really should try to focus on. Like whether it's full court versus half court, that's going to induce something differently from a physical and physiological standpoint. So we have that in control. Body contact, we know it has more mechanical stress. We can control that. You know, the amount of sessions, we can control that. Work to rest ratios in practice, we can control that. So where we start somewhere, there's so many things that, you know, whether it's competitive, you just said we like to start more as a sensible way where guys are just kind of feeling out. And I completely agree with that because, you know, once you get guys from the first practice into competitive games, there would be an incline to more risk. But to touch on the testing part, I do think, and there's a lot of research behind that, you know, aerobic capacity is an important risk factor for injury. So, however, basic aerobic capacity is very hard to lose, but it's also very hard to regain. And I think that's why it's so important in this quarantine period. Don't come in the basement when we see you guys again. And I think that's the most important thing before we talk about, hey, this exercise or that exercise, this is the sets or these are. I think it's super important to keep them active, of course, but so they don't come in the basement. And from my personal, you know, perspective, I would still test them, but in a more of a collaborative way. Why do we have to watch them while they're doing the test? Why don't let me have them test themselves? Of course, it depends on the relationship you have with the athlete, and from athlete to athlete, some guys will maybe cheat, but that's up to them, right? We can educate that story of like, hey, this is super important, and this is why we're asking you to do a minimal yo-yo test at home. Of course, in Spain, it's completely different from all over the world. Maybe other countries are in complete lockdown too. Here in Belgium, we can still run outside and have some time for that, but that all depends. But I think it's super important that we have just an indication. I wouldn't retest it, but just have an indication of like, hey, this guy comes in the basement, which means, hey, coach, we can't go crazy early. We can't go too fast too early with this guy particularly, especially if he has previous injury history, which you just touched on it. And I think that's super important to communicate because usually, from my experience, the most guys who get hurt and always have something going on, whether it's patellar tendonitis, whether it's plantar fasciitis, or the guys who are underprepared from an aerobic standpoint and are thrown out there a little too early. So for me, it's important information. And then lastly, what I really liked about your approach is, you know, court time. This is something we all have in control. And it's probably the most important factor of fatigue and injury, right? The overall volume. What I've struggled with, and this is a question to all of you guys, what I've struggled with is at the end of practice, some coaches like to have a buzzer sound, done, practice is done, bring it in. And some coaches say, hey, if you make 10 shots in a row, you can leave. Well, guess what? All the guys who can't shoot would spend an hour extra on the court, more than an hour. And these guys would get fatigued, whether they're development guys or they're high minute guys, it didn't matter. You have to make 10 shots in a row. And so if it was a tough practice, guess what? It's even worse. So I don't know how you guys would approach that. And kind of my initial idea would be, well, as a strength and conditioning coach, I would compensate and just my lifting sessions would be a little bit shorter for these guys. But I would love to hear you guys on that standpoint, especially the coaches as well, because you all have a preference.
From my point of view, the two things we've done, and we struggle with this also, we kind of joke that it's a lot of fake hustle goes on right after practice because guys shoot for 2 hours and they want to prove to you they're shot makers when we know they aren't. The two things we've done in the past that I think have helped this, and we do during training camp, we've done during summer league, which is similar to this. It's like a 3 or 4 day training camp. One is you put 10 minutes on the clock, so you bring it up as a team. Coach says his thing. We break 10 or 15 minutes on the clock. When that hits 0, everyone's off. And so it's fair. Guys can get their shots, their fake hustle. They can feel – to be fair to players, I understand routines, and I think routines are important. and we have to be compassionate to them. But no one needs to be out there for an hour after. Like, what are we doing, right? So put a certain amount of time on and say, bring it up. We're done as a team. When this hits 0, you're gone. The other good thing we've done in the past is mandatory stretching on one end with the strength coach and mandatory like foam rolling on the other end. So you do each for 5 or 10 minutes, you switch 5 or 10 minutes, and then everyone's done. If you have really stubborn players, a third idea is you can watch film right after practice. So you get them off their feet, you get ice on them, you give them their post-practice shakes, and just they don't really realize, but you might watch a game from 2 months ago and learn something, right? So especially now during these crazy times, that's a third way where you can kind of not have to deal with that, I think.
I love that.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
What I was doing, like, again, like we all sit together, we make the plan and program. What kind of personal improvement program we have for the player depends on their load. Especially when I was working with Sam, we were talking every day before practice, during the practice, after the practice. Like, I never put time on the clock, this and that. But we talk to players, that's enough for you today. Even they want to work, we convince them, try to convince them, let's come tomorrow or the day after, we give you this time. But it will be more benefit for you. So we don't want to kill them, and we don't let them kill themselves by trying so hard. But also there is a personal development program, individual development program. Like for each player, they have different needs. So we take care of their loads. We make the plan. Some might stay 10 minutes longer than everybody else that day. Some might go 5 minutes earlier than everybody else. But more is like communication. I don't know, this is what I did, how I did, and I benefit. I mean, when I look back, I didn't have no issues on that.
And Ekram, I think that's a really awesome point. And we all need to remember that this stuff is to guide the coaching staff. It's not to dictate what the coaches should do. And I've certainly made that mistake of saying this is what we should do instead of saying, I think this is important and let's work together to integrate it somehow, right? And just guide the coaching staff to help drive some decision making on what this practice looks like or this individual work looks like. And Ekram, we had the opportunity to work together for 4 or 5 months, and we had a wide range of different scenarios. And we had those 8-day training camps. We had those month-long scenarios where we were at home in our facility. So I think sometimes this information is very useful, right? But I mean, in this scenario with 10 days, like, I don't want to put lipstick on the pig. It's a hard, tough scenario to succeed in. So I appreciate what you're saying, Jonah, about like the Stockdale paradox and understanding the brutal facts. And then Thomas, like, making sure the players understand, don't come in at the basement. And to me, that is a really, really like strong reflection on how much education have you educated the players on? Like, do they understand the value of this? And this is the perfect scenario. I would say right now, the players and the performance coaches who put the time and effort into explaining why they do certain things with the players, I would say those players are the ones that are succeeding right now because they understand the value of not getting so deconditioned. And we all know there's going to be some level of decondition that's occurring right now, and we're trying to minimize the damage. But Jesse and I talk about it all the time. Like, as long as they understand, don't come into the basement and just come in at the first floor so we can get to the 4th floor safer. Like, to me, that's a big win. But it comes down to their intrinsic motivation. Do they understand the value? Have you educated them, etc.?
Hey.
Go.
Oh,
I go after you. No, you go.
Just to add to that, Sam, like, I think any training camp, and Ekram was talking about preparing a team for, the Olympics in a couple days and competitions. It's from a coach's perspective, it's all about prioritizing, right? So the few categories that I've thought of, just thinking about this prompt of you have 10 days to prepare your team for some type of maybe postseason. It's like your team strategy, right? So your plays, your defensive fundamentals. Remember, you haven't touched your team in maybe 2 months, give or take. And different coaches are sending videos and texts and diagrams. So everyone's approaching that differently. But your team strategy, your teamwork, whether that's just passing, whether that's in Luka's timeline, that 6th day we're off, but maybe it's a team activity, maybe it's a barbecue or team dinner. I think as teens, we're used to being around each other for 7-8 months every day, more than our families. And now we've been isolated. So just getting back to touching each other, feeling each other again. The mental approach that we've all talked about is huge. And then the 4th thing that's really important to me is the game-like situations. So Luka touched on this again, but whether that's 2-on-2, 3-on-3, 4-on-4, 5-on-5, I think we have to get back to competition. Like, we haven't competed in a couple months. So what I personally love is 3-minute games, because a lot of different scenarios come up. Last second plays you have to drop, or after timeouts, or transition defense. You can get to it a lot of different ways. But I thought what Luka talked about earlier, you play 4, 5, 6 games of 3-minute games. I think those could be very, very beneficial.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. I just wanted to reflect a little bit to Thomas, what you said about testing and why you're pro testing. Like, I'm considering probably I'm calm about it, and I'm not now towards testing, because I know exactly where my team is. And we are doing, like, we will have 4 weeks of working online, where every week we have at least 3 high intensity type of work sessions. Is it Tabata, or is it 15, or is it like a little bit longer, 40-20 that coach likes? We're gonna have at least three sessions for 4 weeks. That makes like 12 sessions like that in total. So that's something that keeps me pretty calm about coming back and not running the test. But on the other hand, if I was on the team that let our players, foreigners, which is normally 90% or 95% of the team, let go home, and then I would send them programs, they would work with their own strength coaches, and I would not be sure about really what they did, and I was not able to see them, then I would maybe be in a great doubt, and I would push the coach to run the test so we can really see where the players are. But what I can do, like, I see my players literally every day doing some kind of work. What I even do, like, after we finish, for example, today we had 6 Tabatas, and after that we had the 20-minute cycling. So after every Tabata, I have everyone on mute so they can hear me well. But then after every Tabata, when we finish, I turn them on, and I can literally click and unclick, mute and unmute player by player, and see how they breathe. And even after training session, I can talk with them, and they can tell me it was 6, 7, 8, 9. And by having real feedback from the players, and if we are reaching, for example, intensity of 8, I can really know that we're gonna maybe not develop so much the capacity, but at least maintain it at some level. And then once we get back, it's gonna be enough to start practicing like I want them to practice without running the test. So that's just reflection, and that the support from my feeling now is knowing exactly what we did.
I love that.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Thomas, and then we'll move on and we'll hear what Jesse's got to say.
I think you touched on a fantastic topic, Luka. I think we should definitely make a separation between your returning players and your new players, or the ones you don't have control over. What I've experienced in the past, usually we have problems with guys who are not mandated to come into training camp or can join a little later, or guys who just jump in, especially in the G League, right? We have new players all the time, and to test out. I think when you have less control over them, then it gets more important, I think. So, but if you have control over them every day, I think that's fantastic. And I think it's also a contractual issue. a lot of strength coaches and a lot of performance coaches out there are not with the team for the off season, and also the players, so they don't have any negotiation or anything going on in the off season. So that becomes very tricky. But that's another issue I think to discuss. But love that you brought that up.
Cool. Good stuff, guys. You guys all good? Jesse, you wanna share your screen and
Sure,
switch gears a little bit?
Let me get my
Go, Jesse. Good luck.
All right, can you see my screen?
Yep.
Yes.
All right, cool. So obviously, firstly, thanks to Sam and Thomas for the opportunity. I think what you guys are doing with the IBPC is an awesome resource, one that's going to help coaches, especially in Europe, but all around the world as well, being an affordable resource. It can only be a good thing to upskill these coaches. So again, thanks for the opportunity, and yeah, appreciate that. And especially grateful as well to be in such an elite company as well. I mean, we have some coaches, performance coaches and the like. So very grateful to give my 2 cents on that side of things as well. So I'll get straight into it. So a lot of things that I'm going to touch on as well, Luca sort of already touched on too. So apologies if it's a little bit doubled up here, but very important topics to talk about. So firstly, we have the training status and the chronic load of our players as they're coming in. Obviously, this is one of the most important things. We just spoke about it at length about not coming in at the basement, but the ability for us to apply load and to plan different loads and different training sessions is obviously going to be a function of what they've done previously. Every organization is going to be different in terms of how they quantify that or how they account for that when they come in, whether you test or not test. Irrespective of what you do choose to do, some sort of acknowledgement is, I think, extremely important. The second factor there is individual risk factors. So this is most likely going to be, your injury history, body composition, physical qualities, those sorts of things. And it'll largely be assessment based, but knowing where your players are at when they left to come onto the, to go into the quarantine, knowing where they're at, knowing or having an understanding of training residuals, I think is also important given the mediating capacity that these physical qualities have on your ability to not only handle load, but longitudinally handle load as well. Third point there is the individual load tolerance. Most of us in our positions have had sort of inadvertently had an instance like this before where we've returned back to a training camp, whether it's a compressed preseason schedule or a congested schedule. So let's use that information. Let's use the history of how our athletes have tolerated these spikes in load in the past to see if we can add some context to, how certain individuals may handle increased in load, especially the spikes that will be associated with returning after the quarantine. Number 4 is one that's I think extremely important and occasionally overlooked, is really understanding the game schedule. So when we do return, not only preparing for just the gameplay, but okay, once we do return, what does that schedule look like? Is it 2 games a week, 3 games a week? Are they going to be back-to-backs? What does the game density look like? Keeping that in mind is obviously something that's going to be really important when we prepare. And obviously in this 10-day period, it's a lot more difficult to prepare for, something more longitudinal. But if you do have the capacity over maybe 3-4 weeks to prepare for return to games, making sure that you account for that game schedule and that game density, I think, is an extremely important factor upon returning. Number 5, again, a huge part of my philosophy is understand the game demands and the training demands as best as you possibly can. Really understand the demands of the game and what they impose on the player from a volume standpoint, intensity standpoint, and a density standpoint, as Luke touched on as well, to really understand what we're preparing for. And I really think that the better we understand those demands, the better we can plan with those end demands in mind. And lastly, number 6, and probably the most important, I would say, is the coach integration. Making sure that your coaching staff are involved in all these conversations. They have to be involved in the sense of what is the most important thing? How are we going to play? What do they think are the most important ways to address these certain concepts that are going to be important to the technical and tactical component of how we want to play as a team? So involving them in the discussion is an absolute essential for mine. So in terms of the planning considerations, if we take it down a level now and look a little bit more granular, obviously there's the volume, how much work we're going to do on a daily basis and across the 10-day period. So, this can be as simple as time on legs. It can be mechanical load, player load. It can be the volume of high-speed running. It can be the volume of accelerations and decelerations. All these measures here are measures of volume or how much work was done. With that as well, we have the intensity. So how hard was that? A simple rating of 1 to 10, and RPE is a great way to go about doing that. Most commonly though, and this is a method that I also use, is expressing those volume markers relative to the time on leg. So meters per minute, accelerations per minute, load per minute. All of these things can be indicative of how intense was the session as a volume of how much time they spent. We have contact as well. Something you also need to consider, again, as Luca touched on. Contact is a difficult one, it's on a spectrum. We have obviously 5-on-0, or there's 0 contact at all, and then we have some soft defense or planned defense, or even defense on the coaches, where the coaches might go in and play some dummy defense, all the way up to game-like, where we'd be competing in full scrimmages. And then the last one is frequency. How often? So are we doing 1 session a day, 2 sessions a day? Obviously, it becomes very important when we start to talk about integrating or including strength conditioning sessions or additional conditioning sessions or recovery, film sessions. All of these different pieces have a demand on the athlete. And whilst it might not be a physical demand, it's absolutely a mental demand and potentially a cognitive demand as well that's still imposed on the athlete. So considering the frequency of your planned sessions is also extremely important. And another one that we sort of touched on, and this is sort of my, my take on the half court, full court debate. But, we have intensive over here on the left and extensive on the right. And how I sort of like to explain it is, your intensive drills and your intensive sessions it's like downtown driving, for example, or driving in the city. There's a lot of sharp turns, there's a lot of corners, there's a lot of stopping, there's a lot of starting. So these are more likely your half court drills where there's lots of, it's a compressed area, it's a small area, high accel, decel content, high jumps, lots of explosive movements in these small areas. And then on the flip side, on the extensive, on the right, it's more like highway driving. We're driving on the highway, we're traveling at higher speeds. There's more likely going to be more high speed running, these sorts of things, more full court type drills. So really understanding where your drills fall on that spectrum, I think, is also important. So it's rare that any of our drills are going to be, either completely intensive or completely extensive. But in terms of organizing our training, considering the intensive stress and the extensive stress that these drills impose on our athletes, I think is super important as well, if we want to alternate these stresses. And in addition to that, I guess the weight room stimulus that you apply to your athletes too can also be bucketed in these same categories of intensive or extensive. For example, if we have an extensive type day where there's lots of full court drills, lots of high speed running, well, that might put a focus on the posterior chain. So potentially in the weight room, let's focus on hamstring, glute, calf, posterior chain movements in the weight room to then bucket that stress, which, there is some research out there now to suggest that those adaptation pathways and those fatigue curves and the recovery from that fatigue can more or less be bucketed in the same way, as opposed to if we use contrasting methods. So I really think understanding and bucketing our drills somewhere on that spectrum and organizing in that way would definitely help us plan our 10-day cycle. So there's a lot going on here. This is my 10-day progression example. So we'll unpack that now. We'll start with the graph, which is a simple indication of volume. I think that, me personally, the most important thing to prepare our guys for games is the game itself. So as you can see here in the dark gray, I've indicated that we have games introduced on day 2. And albeit that'll be quite a low volume of games, but the intensity will still be there. Across this 10-day cycle, you can see it's almost 2 5-day microcycles. We go high-low for the first 4 days with that 5th day off. And then you'll see on day 6 and 7, it almost looks like there's 2 high days with games back to back on those games. And I want to revert back to, I think it was my second slide, where we must take into account the contextual factors and, you know, the schedule that we're going to be returning to. So in the NBA, for example, we have back-to-backs, and we have them quite frequently. So to not prepare our players in some sort of back-to-back gameplay situation, I think we'd be doing our players a disservice if we don't introduce that in a more controlled practice environment prior to them experiencing that in season, where, as we know, when we're playing against opponents, is much more unpredictable. So if we can introduce that in a much more controlled situation, I really think that that's going to help us prepare for those back-to-backs that occur. So on the top line here, we have the technical tactical focus. So I've simply alternated those the days where there's more of a skill and a technical tactical component, where, you know, maybe the coaches are more hands-on those days. Maybe there's much more coaching, there's more learning, there's more implementing new drills, all of those sorts of things, new schemes, new tactical plays, the stuff that Jonah's really good at and the stuff that Jonah introduces. And we alternate those days with slightly less coaching on the games, on the days, where we play. So then we can really make sure that we're getting that physical output, that we're reaching those game intensities. And again, understanding the game and understanding the game demands as best as you can really allow you to quantify whether you're reaching those game intensities or not. A lot of research out there now to suggest or to indicate that, you know, the peak demands of certain games and the peak demands for certain positions across an entire game. So now if you have the luxury, I guess, of an external load monitoring system, you can now be very precise with whether you've reached those game intensities or not, irrespective of if you've played the entire volume of a game. In the second row, the loading focus. So as I mentioned on the previous slide, are we working intensively or extensively? And that's not exclusively one or the other. It's just the focus of the session. So day 1 would be more intensive and a high technical tactical focus day, for example, and a moderate intensity. So we would have a lot of teaching, a lot of coach involvement, predominantly in the half court, with a moderate intensity. And if we alternate that with day 2, we're starting to introduce some gameplay. It's extensive, so it's on a full court scale, and the intensity is high. So being able to alternate those two concepts and alternate intensive and extensive allows us to then not only get a balance between, I guess, the technical and the tactical focus and the physical focus, but also the fatigue and, I guess, the different stresses that those drills will impose on the athletes. So I guess in closing, obviously we have to consider those individual factors that I mentioned. Those are going to play a massive part in the initial planning process and the capacity for, you know, where we can bring our guys in at and where we can take them to before we even hit the floor. So those must be considered first. Secondly, the game demands. Again, understanding the game demands as best as we possibly can to not only understand and, I guess, confirm that we're reaching what we want to reach from a volume and intensity standpoint, but also to make sure that, I guess, that we have those contextual factors in mind, that we are preparing for the games that we're going to be undertaking. Number 3, the contextual factors. Again, that's related to the game schedules and the game densities. That should definitely be taken into account in your preparation schemes. And lastly, communicate. I think as Ekram said, as an example he had with Sam, speaking pre-practice, speaking during the practice, speaking after the practice, especially in a 10-day period where we only have that short period of time, communicate over and over again to make sure we stay on the same page with what we're trying to achieve day in, day out. And I truly believe that that is really one of the most important pieces of this entire process, that if we're all on the same page, performance and coaches, we will get the best outcome. And that's all I have for you guys today. So thank you so much.
Jesse, awesome, man. Every time I hear you speak about this stuff, it's like Christmas all over again. So what
really exciting, man.
One question I had for you, and before, I guess for you and Luca, before this even started, do you mind sharing your screen again, Jess?
Yeah, sure.
And showing that slide. I don't know what number it was, but it showed the 10-day
Yeah,
schedule?
absolutely. Let me put that back up.
So one question I had was, what are the easiest ways for coaches to conceptualize this high-low approach and how to organize it so the coach, performance analyst are all speaking the same language? And for Ekram and Jonah, like when you guys look at this, does this give you guys a clear path on, okay, this is helpful information, now I can help guide some practice planning? Or is there a little more information needed to really understand what this 10-day approach looks like? Because I mean, this is it in a nutshell from what Jesse put together, and just really interested to hear the coach's point of view on all this stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's, you try to make it as simple as possible, obviously. In terms of the volume and how this progression looks, it can be something as simple as time on legs. If we don't have the luxury of the external load monitoring or an internal load monitoring system, it can be as simple as exposure, time on legs. And these dark gray bars indicating games can be the time spent playing games as opposed to the time spent developing skills in a more controlled setting. So just because we don't have the external load monitoring or the technology or IMUs or what have you, doesn't mean we could still follow a nice progression and a nice approach. It just, again, and I keep harping on this, but it just has to be communicated really well as to what this means and what that's going to look like on a day-to-day. Like we can talk about what day 3 and 4 and 5 and all these days are going to look like, but we have to have a really clear understanding, and everyone, including the coaches, has to have a clear understanding of, okay, today is day 1. We're going to try and focus in the half court. There's going to be a high technical, tactical focus, and the intensity is going to be moderate.
Sam, just to answer your question, from my point of view, it gives a very clear kind of roadmap to the 10 days. I guess my question for all of you strength coaches, and I think the answer might have to do with what happens after the 10 days. Like, is everyone in the league scheduled to play 2 exhibition games? Or is that 11th day, are we starting the playoffs? And every league across the world might be different. But for me, like, let's just say that on that 11th day, we're playing a game. Okay, a real game, playoffs or not. Would you guys suggest having like 1 or 2 intra-squad scrimmages, like a full 48 or 40-minute game during that week? Or even, every league will approach it differently, but like we're in Sacramento. So if it were up to me, at some point, either after the 10th day, if we had some time, or during the 10 days, I would coordinate with the Golden State Warriors. It's an hour and a half away, and I would have a scrimmage. Like, to me, that just makes sense. I don't know what your guys' take on that is.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. And again, as you said, depending on the progression and when we start playing games, if that 11th day is a game and we're starting already, I think it's a balance between how much time you have and how much, I guess, fatigue or how much recovery time you're willing to sacrifice for that preparation. Obviously, the more you squeeze in, it's almost like a rubber band, right? The more you squeeze in, the more time that's going to take for you to recover from those 10 days. Conversely, if you take a very conservative approach, you don't do a whole lot of load, you're going to be quite fresh at the end of the 10 days, but are you going to be prepared? Well, probably not.
Because like you said, it's all about preparing your team to playing games, right?
Exactly.
We're
That's
not
the most important part.
at playing in practice. So just from a coach's perspective, I think game-like situations, whether it's a scrimmage or inter-squad scrimmage or 6-minute game, I want to get there as quickly as possible to practice that as much as possible.
This is a really – sorry, Johnny. You still going?
Nope.
It's a really good question. And Jesse, when we were working together, I would always kind of pick your brain about getting game intensity in practice on specific drills. And you did a really nice job categorizing and bucketing specific drills, saying, yeah, this is game intensity from like a mechanical load, per minute, so mechanical intensity, right? And we can overlay that with the second spectrum data on game days. And it was kind of like, we kind of talked about this, like there's no exposure or stimulus that can be compared to a game instead of a game. Like there's this fallacy of, oh, this was game intensity, and I get that. And I think it's probably a little more valuable from an RTP standpoint to expose them to that game intensity before we let them go. But so I think that's a really good question, Jonah, and something to definitely be considered.
I have a question on that as well, if you don't mind. From a volume perspective, especially for the audience, because I know a lot of them out there don't have the IMU or the second spectrum or the expensive equipment. So you touched on volume as time on feet as a very easy marker to have and valuable marker. And from an intensity aspect, RPE, rated perceived exertion, giving the athletes a score from 1 to 10, how hard was the practice? Lately, I've been thinking, and especially because the head coaches and the coaches on this webinar has spoken about the mental load of it as well. Would it be interesting to combine the RPE score just from a physical standpoint? So asking the athlete, how hard was this practice from a physical standpoint? And then asking a second question from a mental perspective, how hard was this practice? Because I think these are two different loadings that you can combine or look at separately. And I think that would add some value also to the coaches, because they're interested in to know, well, who is coping with my practices from a physical standpoint and who is coping with the practice from a mental standpoint. Just something that I've been thinking about lately, but I haven't implemented it. But would love to hear you guys, if you guys use that or consider that.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I've thought about at length as well, because we know that cognitive demand or that mental piece is, is something that's so important. And when, games come down to really, really close, margins, it's quite often that mental piece, and Jonah and Ekram, you can speak to this too. It's that mental piece, being able to execute the right thing at the right time, that quite often is the difference. And, there's a little bit of research out there in soccer in England that use something called a differential RPE that, tries to split up the RPE into different components. Was it the legs? Was it your lungs? Was it mental? And all of these different things. And, those things are great. And I think that's going down the right path. But practically, you have to make sure that it's a valid measure, of course. And you have to make sure that you're going to get, and that data is going to be useful essentially. And we have to make sure as well that, okay, is mental load as taxing as the physical load? Is that something we should also alternate with a high-low approach? Or is a high mental load 4 or 5 times a week something that we want? Is that something that is going to be favorable? We have a lot, I think it's very early in that research development, but yeah, definitely I think we're on the right path in terms of trying to quantify the mental components to this.
The reason I wanted to touch on that is because from my personal experience, usually when an athlete starts to report, and this could be through a conversation or the RPE score, when they start to be bored or actually have some symptoms that we would say, maybe this guy gets a little bit overtrained or is not really at the right level we want him to be mentally, a few weeks later, we start to see flare-ups negatively in the physical load. So from my personal experience, I've always kind of saw them, and also from an emotional intelligence standpoint, that they would report negative aspects psychologically earlier than physically. But of course, this is speculative. This is not completely science-based yet, but I think it's certainly something interesting to look at. Sorry, Luca, but go ahead.
No. Everything. Okay. 3 things. First of all, Jesse, brilliant presentation, man. I was just like, I had my camera on just to see my jaw, because if it would be dropping all the time, I was just like taking a look if everything is okay, because I can see on the left corner it's recording, so I was just like controlling myself. Really, really good job. I really liked it. Second thing, to answer Jonah's question, about the games and how to organize some kind of scrimmage. For me, I put like 4x6 and 4x8 minutes because already it's a huge step for European methodology of work to have these kind of intra-team scrimmage games during practices. Usually our coaches are just like, run this play, run this play, run this play, okay, next play, run this play, run this play, 1 transition, 2 transitions, and so on. They never want to put, like, not everyone, but for example, and now it's like having these 2 games, I think it's enough because we are considering 4x6 without substitution, so intra team, maybe 1 sub, okay, maybe 1 sub with younger guy or maybe the guy who is loaded. So you will have in 1 training session, you will have 24 minutes game, and then in the next one, you will have 32. For our FIBA rules, up to 40 minutes, it's more than enough to have like real game demands, because you don't have many players who play more than 32 minutes, maybe 1 player on the team, and 24 minutes is more than enough. We are not talking here about 15, 16 minutes. That might not be enough of the stress. And it's already connected to the next question or the comment about what you touched after, is what Thomas asked actually, is the intensity versus, and how to integrate it and how to control it when you don't have micro technology. And something that what I took advantage of, and this is something that I'm very proud of. It was the last piece of my PhD project, and I like it because it was very practical. It was the analysis of regular team games that we have, like scrimmage game, scrimmage game 5-on-5, compared to friendly games, official friendly games that were played against very, very good team, Euro Cup or EuroLeague teams. And then it was compared to another type of training game, which was like no-stop game. I called it no-stop game because we took free throws out and we put ball quickly back in the game. And then what we realized is that you can improve or increase the demands of the game. Many demands of the game you can improve by this no-stop game. But here we are talking a little bit about different terms. We will improve intensity if we are asking RPEs and we say RPEs for the intensity. But on the other hand, if you look at the numbers of the micro technology, you might lose the intensity of some movements because you are fatigued. So you cannot repeat so many high efforts in accelerations or high intensity jumps. So you will decrease the intensity of some movements, but you will increase the density and the demand of that game. So here we have to divide a little bit what is the density and real demand and perceived exertion to real intensity and quality of movements. So we have to know what we want to achieve with those kind of overloaded demands and overload type of drills, you know. But it's a little bit like more details, and maybe we should not bother our head coaches with so many details, but we need to really know what we are trying to achieve. And with those kind of parameters, you don't have to have micro technology, but you need to know what you're looking for. I don't know if that made sense.
Shout out actually to Jonah, because especially with our non-rotation guys who don't get a whole lot of game time, Jonah quite frequently runs those guys in, you know, some 2-on-2, 3-on-3, whatever numbers we have. And, you know, based on really understanding the game demands and those numbers, we've put together a nice schedule and a nice sort of way to overload those game demands and, you know, get 20 minutes of gameplay into, you know, 12 to 15 minutes. And, you know, using these extra rules, and Jonah, you can probably touch on those, but, you know, extra balls, all this sort of stuff. Like, Jonah does an awesome job about overloading that and getting in the work we need in a much more compressed time.
Yeah, Luca, you were talking about this, but whether it's 2-on-2 or 3-on-3, one game we like to do is I have a ball at the top and they're playing with another ball, and any made basket, we're playing the half court, any made basket or change of possession, miss shot, steal, turnover, they leave that ball and I just outlet the second ball, and then maybe another coach outlets the second ball to me. So it's just it's like you said, nonstop, continuous. And I think, Jesse, that's probably the best game that we've done to get high intensity in a short amount of time. And guys, you do it for 2 or 3 possessions for each team, and guys are running around like with their heads cut off, just get
Mm-hmm.
very quickly, which is the goal.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. That's the way. We just have to know, like, you might improve the intensity, as I say, but actually on numbers behind high intensity movements, you will actually drop a little bit. But that should not be a problem for us, because we have to train players while being fatigued.
Absolutely.
And guys,
Yeah,
I wanna
Go ahead, Ekram.
I wanna share some of my experience there. We are preparing for the short season, like a tournament or something. Maybe I don't know how long it's gonna take. Some countries different, maybe month, maybe 1 month and a half. We are preparing to play this short season. So my first approach to this short 10 days training camp to make my team be able to play that first game, get ready. Then because we have time to continue, we have time to improve this and that. So like we were talking, Jonah was saying, I used in my Olympic preparation this and that when I have very small time, 10 days or 12 days preparation with the team, 2 minutes, 3 minutes scrimmages. And I have excellent experience with this. It puts the team in shape very quickly, and I can rest players. Talking with my strength and conditioning coach, we need to rest this game, this guy, we need to go with this guy, but team was very ready to play that first game. Then we buy time to prepare for the next games. So, I mean, excellent information here, valuable information. But then it comes again, we have to try to compete on these games. And technical side, keep the guys on the same page, keep them mentally ready to fight without getting injured. So I think, again, it goes to communication, whole stuff, communicating with the players, preparing them, forcing them, but not forcing them too much. So, I mean, but I just wanted to share my experience with the short preparation. These 3 minutes, 2 minutes games, like non-stop. It's not like calling play after play. This is different practice, but this gives us confidence. Players enjoy it. They continue. It's also competitive. They like it too. It's also a lot of details. And then when it's finished, you have 1 or 2 minutes to teaching time, talking this and that. I benefit a lot. I just wanted to share with you guys this experience. I'm done.
Hey, Thomas and Sam, just one quick comment. Let's just say it's May 15th that we're able to go back. And again, it's going to be different everywhere in the world. I just believe, like, from a coach's perspective, these are the conversations you performance and strength and conditioning coaches should be having once you formulate the plan. Like, you should be having these conversations yesterday, right? Like, leading up to that first practice. And then after practice 1, checking in. Because once you get into practice, we all know a player might do something, a coach might get mad, or it's a good competition and he or she wants to keep it going. And all of those things, like, we always have a plan. And we have a saying, like, plan your dive your plan, right? But that being said, we all know it's never perfect. And once we get into a game or a practice, it never goes exactly to that plan. So that's where Jesse and Luca, you both mentioned, and it's just so vital to highlight again that communication both ways. And then every day, just checking in after the fact, I think can go a long ways.
So I think that, like, Jonah, that's a really good point. And at least in the NBA season, with my very, very minimal NBA experience, it seems like a good opportunity to either make up some of that load that was maybe not as high as the day before, or to back off a little bit because the day before is a little bit higher, is like the pre-work and the post-work, the pre-practice work or the post-practice work. And it's like, if that's the only thing that changes, like, Jesse, a good amount of the load comes from that, right?
Right,
And
especially for the guys who don't get a ton of reps in practice.
yeah, and if nothing else changes about practice and coach wants to do what coach wants to do, and then maybe you can manipulate some of the pre-work and or post-work, because at least in the NBA, there's player development coaches that are specifically, there to work with the players pre-practice and post-practice to work on one-on-one or small group settings. So like that's pretty unique to at least the NBA environment, and I'm sure some NCAA teams do it and some European teams do it as well. Ekram, I know we did that a lot, their national team. So, but I think that's a really good opportunity that often gets overlooked. We always just think about the time the whistle starts and the time the whistle ends, like in that time frame, and it's probably not as complex. You're like, look, we're not dealing with 15 players. I'm talking to you as a coach one-on-one, just this one player. Let's try and get a little more of this or whatever. You guys got any other questions? Anything else to add? Maybe a good time to.
I just wanted to add one more thing, Sam, that we touched on, but maybe just to reemphasize a little bit for the audience, as I believe that maybe we share this common pitfall, as you will, may have with the structure once we get to team practices. So as you said, Jonah, I completely agree that it's our job right now to get them as ready as we can for that day one, for intensity work. We should really get them as close as we can. Once we start, what I've often see is that our high days, so our high intensity days, high volume days, or very heavy days, we don't get much out of it as we want. And I see a lot of coaches kind of a little bit frustrated, or like they're talking to me or to strength coaches like, hey, why are we not getting enough intensity out of this? But then the next day they do it all over again. And then the next day again, and then the fourth day they have a low day. So instead, and Sam talked about this a lot with me, and I've really learned from his approach, which he, I would believe, took from Charlie Francis back in the days. But the high-low model allows you to have the high days be higher and the low days to allow you to adapt to that stimulus. So, and you make everyone happier. The coaches get what they want out of it, and the strength and conditioning coaches are happy because athletes are recovering. And I think oftentimes we just see similar lows and then we decrease. So, and I think the longer you work with a head coach, the easier it becomes, because you know exactly what the style is, you know what a week is, what a 10-day will look like. And I think that's one of the reasons why the CSCCA and the NSCA, which are two governing bodies in the strength conditioning world, have reported a difference or a recommended approach with a clear difference between returning athletes, coaches, and staff, and new coaches and new staff, because there should be a very clear difference in terms of the load that you're going to prescribe, because you don't know what to expect, and that can become risky. So I think that's very important, at least in my opinion, to add to that great conversation that we had so far. So
Definitely.
Yeah, great stuff, guys. Looks like we got a few questions down below. Thomas, you want to maybe field some of them, look through them?
Well, honestly, we have a lot, so I'll have to kind of pick my battles a little bit. It's funny how actually quite a lot of people have touched on the mental aspect. So even prior to, so I want to kind of give the favor to the people that actually emailed us prior to the webinar. And the main question that was, there's three questions, but they're kind of common in terms of what we do for the athletes in terms from a cognitive training aspect. Are you guys aware? How do you guys implement this aspect? And maybe are there any measurement tools that we use? but from a cognitive standpoint. And even the head coach started off the webinar talking about this. So it's really interesting to maybe, we don't have a sport psychologist on our webinar, but I think it's pretty important for us to all have a basic understanding of what we try to do on that front. So it's a question for actually all of you. So
I gotta say, at least my experience with the Kings, I learned like a tremendous amount from film sessions and watching the coaches chop that up with the players. Like I thought that was extremely valuable, just to see it in slow motion, and obviously it's easier to critique in slow motion when you've had time to review the film. But some of the coaches on the Kings staff, like Coach Bob Byer, I mean, he would do an unbelievable job of just sticking to a few defensive principles and be extremely consistent throughout the season. And there's just no surprises. Like those were his principles. And I bet like if he wasn't even there and the film ran, I bet the players at some point could just identify and just kind of hear Bob's voice. So at least from like a film standpoint, I found that extremely valuable.
anyone else?
To add to that with film, I think a couple things, like if I'm making a point on film and I'm talking to Sam, I'm really also talking to Thomas and Luca and Jesse and Ekram, right? Like I think players sometimes have a tendency to just focus in on themselves and they just want to watch themselves, which we all do. Like that's normal. But it's important during these film sessions, and Bob and Igor Kokoshkov, you know, the two guys that lead a lot of our film sessions are really good at talking to the whole team and using that example for the whole team. And then the other thing too is deciding how much positive and how much negative to show. Is it half and half? Is it after a win? Is it after a loss? Are you happy? Are you sad? Is the team won and you're the opposite? There's just all these things that you have to take into account. And then lastly with that is, are we doing it as a team, or am I taking Luca aside and showing him these clips? And sometimes on that one-on-one setting, I think you can get a little deeper and you can ask more opinions. I mean, even in a group setting, sometimes we'll have them talk it out. Tell me what you see. Because it's not about what us coaches know. The next day, like Sam said, we can slow it down and it's easy, right? Like the game isn't played like that. The game is about reads and reactions. So trying to get inside their head and just ask them, what did you see here? I think those are the types of conversations you want to try to have during the film sessions to really gain something from a mental approach.
I love that. I love that, because one thing you just touched on, Jonah, is you can't treat everyone the same in terms of how you give feedback. And one of the things that we do with our psychologists here is do a personality test way before everything starts. And then what's really interesting this year is that we have a whole spectrum of different personalities. From, you know, we had a guy coming from Colombia, a guy coming from Jamaica, a guy coming from Canada. So like it was super diverse in terms of their cultural background, their belief system, their value system. And so a guy who grew up in Senegal. And so what we saw is that you have a lot of introverted guys, a lot of extroverted guys, and usually they are the ones who don't get along as much because the extroverts like to be loud and they kind of seek that energy. And then the introvert guys are the ones who shoot by themselves. They're all apart. And when you call out an introvert, oftentimes, or at that end of the spectrum, they feel kind of maybe not comfortable in that, and they may react like, hey, that's not true, or you know, have a little bit of a barrier in there, and you don't get much out of that feedback. So I think profiling athletes in terms of personality, and I'm sure coaches are really good at that because that's what they do, right? They read their athletes, they know their personnel. But it was very interesting for us because we had this conversation on the table with the psychologist, the head coach, and us, like, hey, this is what they are in terms of profile, and this is the best way to approach them. to get the most out of them, because that's what we want. We want the best out of each player every day. So, and then the last one I wanted to add, this is coming from a friend. He's starting something new, but it's based on a lot of evidence, is shared leadership. So a lot of teams use a captain as the one who's doing everything. So in terms of like, hey, you're going to be the first in the locker room, last one out. You're going to be the one leading the warm-ups, etc., etc. So he's kind of like the vocal leader, the active leader, the all-in-one leader. But research shows that nearly 1 to 5% are able to possess all these skills. One is more a vocal leader. Someone else might be more of a active leader, etc., etc. So what they suggested is to profile these athletes based on a simple questionnaire, based on evidence-based data, and then profile them. Hey, who would be the best one to lead your team in terms of action? Who would be the one in terms of vocal? And then what is interesting too is that in that questionnaire is that they give feedback on other teammates. How confident are you that this guy can lead the team in terms of whatever it may be? I think there were 4 categories. But I think it's a very interesting thought, because I've worked with a lot of teams who had one captain, and I agree, he was fantastic. I'm not giving names, but usually they're fantastic in 2 elements, but maybe not the third, and that could hurt the team in some sort of ways. So, like for example, we had a captain and he would never break down a hurdle. He just doesn't do it, and it would always be like, all right, back on the court. But he's the best leader out there in terms of action. He's always the first. He does everything you would desire of a professional, but there's no vocal involved. So, and that's of course a decision you have to make as a coach. But I think it's an interesting topic to dive deeper into. That's just the 2. Sorry, I rambled a lot. Those are just the two ideas that I like.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I'm a huge proponent of any type of mental work and mental improvement. And I love when clubs in Europe invest money in it. We had an opportunity in Baskonia previously to hire some guys, mental coaches, sports psychologists, and so on. We don't have them on a regular stuff every season because it also depends on the head coach. But I think it's a huge thing, and I think we all should invest money, invest time to educate ourselves, at least read books and try to understand how to approach to every person individually, how to understand their personalities, as you say, also coming from different backgrounds, different cultures, and so on. Now, of course, we have to look for it because we are working with athletes in the team environment, and you can read your whole life about it and just explore and try to put it in practice. But as you say, and I completely agree on it, that we should also look for a professional help. In this case, hire a person who really knows what they are doing, because I might get chunks from this side and that side. At my sports university, I had sports psychology as a course. I had privilege to study in Sweden in a group with sports psychologists, some of them leaders now in Europe in their own centers. And I know the value behind it. I know how deep analysis can be and what you can really do. And what I realized also from the practical point of view is that those kind of people, if they are not like, if they don't have a really high ego to put themselves in front of everyone, they can really be a huge support for all coaching staff who have direct relationship with the players. And in my case, for example, when I organize something, they can really understand group dynamics, and they can tell me before my training session in the morning, lifting session, they would come to me and give some kind of tools, advices. Say, look, I pushed this guy, push today this guy because of this and that. Try to organize the start of the practice like you organized 3 weeks ago, because this might help. I saw a good reaction from the team. And also he will, what is even more important, and I think this is the huge piece that is missing here in Europe especially, I don't know if it's because of ego or lack of knowledge or something else. I don't want to blame anyone or go into deeper analysis on that, but I think the major problem in Europe is that head coaches are in, I don't know if Ekrem will agree with me, but a lot of head coaches are not looking for this kind of knowledge. Like from my point of view, if I was a head coach, I would hire on my own strength sports psychologist who would give me tools to improve my work if I wouldn't know exactly what to do, you know. And I think it can be a huge benefit for a team success in the end, because he can provide me daily tools which will improve how I work with the team. Because usually in Europe, very often you can see coaches just show up for the practice. There is no speech before practice, so players even don't know what is the goal of that practice. After the practice is just 1, 2, 3, the captain calls. You don't make some kind of summary of that practice. You don't say good things, bad things, you know. Video sessions, 45 minutes, 1 hour, 1 minute 30, always the same. You always go through bad stuff in defense, bad stuff in offense, some good stuff, and you go home. You don't leave players with a task, with the analysis. You don't leave them with actually saying out loud in front of everyone what was a bad thing, what was a good thing. You know, I couldn't go in every video session with every coach that we had, but in the past, I took advantage of some coaches who said like, Luka, I don't mind if you are inside of video room. And I would be there not to watch video sessions, because sometimes I really lack knowledge in tactical stuff. I would just look at the players and get information how they behave there, because it would be a very valuable piece of information for me, because after video, we might go to the court, we might go to the lifting room, and I would use those expressions, those reactions of players and really know what is happening. And very often we don't even know, like before the game, there is just like always the same thing with many coaches, not saying with everyone, but there is always a paper on the wall, 5 rules that no one actually pays attention to. But if you sometimes change dynamics and maybe give each player a unique task that they have to focus on, it might completely change their focus. And we know that when players really focus on one thing, it becomes contagious in a positive way, and then they become really successful in many different things. And those are just a couple of ideas or chunks what I've learned from real sports psychologists, you know. But it's not me who can say anything about it. And I think the head coaches should look for it, you know. And if they cannot invest throughout the season to have someone behind them, at least during the summertime, they can educate themselves about these kind of topics and how to get those tools. Please,
may I jump in? Now, guys, I was thinking, I mean, this is my subject. I'm in my academy, just started. This is what I'm delivering. I believe, like at the beginning of the meeting, I said, no other part is more important than the other one. Mental side, physical side, craft, everything is important. But if I want to put something little bit up as a value, mental side is the most important. So I did invest on this lot in my time when I was coaching the club team or national team as much as possible. I believe this is a must. This is a must. People taking support from the sports psychiatrists, this and that, they got the knowledge. If you talk to them, they know how to behave, they know how to refocus, they know how to fight with the stress, they know, but it's not life habit. They don't practice it. If they don't practice, they don't bring it on the place. It's just information. So we need to provide, this is what I'm doing, and I did. And like in year 2014, we won EuroLeague championship in women's with Galatasaray. Whole our season was based on the mental preparation. From the year before, we make the plan, we make the resource, we watch the whole games. We find out that we are not concentrated enough. Our focus wasn't there. So we attack there, and we managed to minimize the mistakes that we can avoid. Very simple thing, basic, simple, nothing big. It was the main element that brought to EuroLeague Championship. So I believe this 100%. I'm doing myself. I'm fighting for this with the clubs, because clubs most of the time they don't want to invest on this. They don't believe that it worth money. So it's not easy to bring somebody and keep in the organization in Europe, because clubs don't have too much money, all the clubs. But what I believe, this is the most important thing. But as a coaches, as a staff, we have to model. We can't say people focus, be in the moment, be mindful, this, fight with the stress, blah, blah, and we can't do it ourselves. That's bullshit. So we have to educate our environment first, as much as possible. Then we have to model it. Then they will follow us. This is what I see, what I believe, what I'm fighting for this, for. And I think this is the main thing. I just wanted to share these ideas.
Brilliant.
That's great.
100% agree, Hector. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's funny because we wanted to have our athletes, for example, have better lifestyles, whether it's sleep or nutrition. But if we come in and don't practice what we preach, then what are we doing, right? It's right. Like, even just work ethic, you know, being there early, guys start to see what is the new normal, what is the new norm. I think it's fantastic that you brought it up, Hector.
I apologize. Just one more thing. We can't say people do this, do this, do this. Don't be late. Focus. Be in the moment. And we don't do it. It's nothing.
You lead by the example.
I mean, it's like it's a destroy. Done. Finished. Nothing to talk.
Right. Sam, how much time do we have? How are we on time check? I think these conversations are awesome, so we could go on until the next morning. But
yeah, this would go on till the next few days. I know it's getting late over by the European guys, so I think it's probably a good time to wrap up.
Yeah, I mean, the questions that we had were related to these topics. To the audience, please feel free to still engage with us through social media. The LinkedIn group particularly is the best way to reach out with questions, and not just with us, but with each other, because that's one of our main missions, right? To integrate various fields, because at the end of the day, we're all about one thing, it's basketball performance. So having that integrated model, talking with other people, I love it, and I think it's really where growth is at its peak. There was one more question that we didn't touch on in the Q&A, which is nutrition, but Sam and I are planning to have a separate webinar dedicated to nutrition. So I think it would be best to not dive in this as well right now, but leave this for the next session. So
can I just add, for Jonah and Ekram, do you guys have an email or social media handle that if anyone has any additional questions for you two, they can reach out to? I know Luca and Jesse both left some contact info on their slides, but I don't know if Jonah and Ekram, if you guys have a contact that would work well.
Yeah, I'm just going to, everyone has access to the group chat in here?
I also put on chat.
Yes.
I'll put my email.
Yeah, if you go to all panelists and attendees.
Yep.
Yep, got it. Ekram,
Coming.
is there a good way for someone to reach out to you if they have a question for you?
Yes, yes.
Oh, you got it.
Yes.
You're ahead of the curve, man. I didn't know.
well, sorry.
I'm also just going to put my website. Anyone that wants to look at it, to see my new project. There's some really good, similar conversations we're having today. Some good panels in the resource section on that website. So reach out however I can help. If anyone's ever in America, Luke's very good about letting people come watch practice. So if you want to come watch shoot around or practice or come to a game, just send me an email and we'll get you in there.
Come on, Luca.
Awesome.
When we're
I'm
allowed
coming.
to, when we're allowed to fly again, right? When the borders open.
Wow, shut up. I first have to get visa. So easy.
Ekram probably has a private jet that he can come on over.
Yeah, sure. Sure. Of course.
Obviously.
All right, guys. Let's call it a wrap. First of all, we want to talk. We want to not talk. We want to thank all of our audiences for jumping on. We went way above what is can be handled by Zoom, at least under our subscription. But we really want to thank, especially the ones who are actually not performance coaches, also them, of course, but everyone who joins who want to learn about different things. And then, of course, our panelists. I mean, there were fantastic discussions today. I wrote a lot of notes, learned so much, and I think that's what it's all about. So, Luca, Jonah, Ekrem, Jesse, Sam, everyone, we really deeply appreciate you because time is the most valuable thing, right, that we have. So, we really appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you very much. It was great. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you.
Take care. Be safe.
Thanks for your insight. You too.
Absolutely.
Bye bye.
See you guys.